The wine glass caught the afternoon light as Verena raised it high above the crowded table. Her perfectly manicured hand gleamed with rings I could never afford. She cleared her throat, demanding silence from our extended family gathered at the upscale cafe for cousin Darius's birthday celebration. "To those who try," she announced, her voice dripping with false sweetness, "even if they're broke." Laughter erupted around the table. Sharp, cutting laughter that sliced through the comfortable hum of conversation. I felt every pair of eyes turn toward me, sitting at the far end in my oil-stained work jacket. The mechanic, the failure, the embarrassment. Verena's smile widened as she took a long sip, savoring both the wine and my humiliation. Uncle Christoph slapped the table, wheezing with laughter. Aunt Delora covered her mouth, but her eyes sparkled with cruel amusement. Even cousin Darius, whose birthday we were supposedly celebrating, smirked into his napkin. I said nothing, just looked down at my water glass, watching condensation drip slowly down the side. My hands, permanently stained with grease no soap could fully remove, stayed folded in my lap. This wasn't new. Verena had been doing this for years. What she didn't know was that everything was about to change. The server appeared beside our table, a young woman with kind eyes and a professional smile. She held a leather folder containing the bill for our extravagant meal. Verena had ordered for everyone without asking, choosing the most expensive items on the menu as she always did. Lobster, imported steaks, bottles of wine that cost more than I made in a week. Everyone expected her to take the bill. She always paid, always made a show of it, always used it as another opportunity to remind everyone of her success and my failure. But the server walked past Verena's outstretched hand. She walked past Uncle Christoph, past Aunt Delora, past every expectant face at the table. She stopped directly in front of me and placed the leather folder down gently. My name was printed clearly at the top of the receipt. Owner account, Nico Castellan. The table fell silent. Verena's wine glass froze halfway to her lips. Her face drained of color, transforming from smug satisfaction to pure confusion in the span of a heartbeat. I didn't say anything, just looked at her across the table, calm and unreadable, as I had been my entire life. My name is Nico, and I didn't used to be this man. 6 months earlier, my world was small and predictable. I woke before dawn every morning in my cramped studio apartment above the laundromat on Fessler Street. The walls were thin enough that I could hear Mrs. Yara's dryers rumbling below, a steady rhythm that had become my alarm clock. My job as a bus mechanic at the municipal depot didn't pay well, but it was honest work. I spent my days under vehicles, replacing brake pads, fixing transmission leaks, ensuring that strangers could get to work safely. My hands were always dirty, my fingernails permanently outlined in black, my work shirts stained with oil that never fully washed out. While I fixed broken buses, Verena climbed the corporate ladder at some prestigious company she never stopped talking about. She wore designer suits and attended networking events at expensive hotels. She had a luxury apartment in the city center with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the river. She had everything. I had nothing. At least that's what everyone thought. Every Thursday afternoon, after my shift ended at the depot, I walked the same route through the old quarter, past the bakery that always smelled of cinnamon, past the bookstore with its sun-faded display window, past the flower vendor who never seemed to have any customers. That's where I always found Miss Amina. She was frail, her back bent with age, her eyes clouded with what I assumed was cataracts. She wore the same threadbare scarf every week, wrapped tightly around her thin shoulders even in warm weather. Every Thursday, she struggled to cross the busy intersection near the market, her cloth shopping bags weighing her down. The first time I helped her, she seemed startled. The second time, she smiled. By the third time, she was waiting for me. "See you next week, Miss Amina," I always said after carrying her groceries to her doorstep at the old apartment building on Meridian Lane. She never said much, just patted my hand with her papery fingers and shuffled inside. I never asked questions, never expected anything in return. It was just something I did. Verena's 32nd birthday party was held at the Grandview estate, a historic mansion converted into an event venue. The invitation specified formal attire. I showed up in my only suit, purchased secondhand 3 years ago and now slightly too tight around the shoulders. The gifts were displayed on a long marble table like trophies. Crystal vases, designer handbags, jewelry boxes from boutiques I'd never even heard of. Each one wrapped in expensive paper with elaborate bows. My gift looked pathetic beside them. A wallet I'd made myself from recycled leather scraps salvaged from the bus depot. I'd spent weeks stitching it carefully, creating a simple pattern that I thought was elegant. It had taken me hours to get the edges straight. Verena opened it in front of everyone. She held it up between 2 fingers like it might contaminate her, her nose wrinkling in disgust. "How rustic," she said, her tone making it clear what she really meant. The room filled with uncomfortable laughter. She tossed it onto the discard pile without another word and reached for the next gift, something expensive and shiny that made her squeal with delight. I stood in the corner, invisible as always, and watched. After my Thursday visits with Miss Amina, I had another routine. Every evening before heading home, I stopped by the alley behind Torrance Street, where several stray cats lived among the dumpsters and broken crates. I brought leftovers from my modest meals, chicken bones, rice, whatever I had to spare. I'd set the food in clean containers near the makeshift shelter someone had built from cardboard boxes, then step back and wait. The cats would emerge cautiously, their eyes glowing in the dim light, and eat while I watched. One evening, a little girl appeared at the alley entrance, holding her mother's hand. She couldn't have been more than 7 years old, with curious dark eyes that studied me carefully. "Do you do this every night?" she asked. I shrugged. "They wait for me." The girl smiled. Her mother pulled her away gently, but not before glancing back at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. Something between respect and pity. I didn't do it for recognition. I did it because someone had to. Family dinners at my parents' house happened monthly, a tradition my mother insisted on maintaining despite the obvious tension that permeated every gathering. The dining room table was always too crowded, chairs squeezed together, voices competing for attention. Verena dominated every conversation, discussing her latest promotion or the executive retreat she'd attended or the important client she'd impressed. Uncle Christophe and Aunt Delora hung on her every word, their admiration obvious and suffocating. I usually sat quietly at the far end, eating slowly, saying little. After dinner, I always offered to help clean up. It was automatic, instinctive. My mother waved me away without looking up from the sink. "Don't bother, Nico. Go fix something. That's what you're good at." Not a compliment, just a dismissal. A reminder that my usefulness was limited to manual labor, to things no one else wanted to do. Verena was in the living room, laughing loudly at something Uncle Christophe said. No one defended me. No one ever did. I collected plates silently and carried them to the kitchen anyway. While I scraped leftover food into the trash, my youngest cousin Leo slipped into the kitchen. He was only 9 years old, small for his age, with the same dark hair our grandmother had passed down through the family. He stood beside me at the sink, not saying anything at first, just watching me wash dishes with careful attention to detail, making sure nothing remained on the plates before setting them in the drying rack. "You're my favorite, you know?" he whispered finally, glancing toward the living room to make sure no one overheard. "You're the only one who listens." I looked down at him, this small boy who felt as invisible as I did. I wanted to say something meaningful, something that would help him understand that being overlooked didn't mean being worthless. But words had never been my strength. Instead, I just smiled and handed him a dish towel. "Want to help?" His face lit up, and together we finished the dishes in comfortable silence, while the rest of the family celebrated Verena's latest achievement in the next room. The following Thursday, I arrived at the usual intersection at the usual time, but Miss Amina wasn't there. I waited for 15 minutes, watching the intersection light cycle through red and green several times. Other elderly people crossed, but none of them were her. Maybe she was sick. Maybe she'd simply decided to shop on a different day. I walked to her apartment building on Meridian Lane anyway, climbing the 3 flights of stairs to her door. I knocked gently. No answer. The next Thursday, she wasn't there either. Or the Thursday after that. I asked the flower vendor if he'd seen the elderly woman with the clouded eyes and the threadbare scarf. He shook his head. I asked the bookstore owner, the baker, the mail carrier who covered that route. No one knew her. No one remembered seeing her recently. It was as if she'd simply vanished, leaving no trace except the memory of her papery hand patting mine gratefully every week. I felt her absence like a physical ache. Not because I'd lost something, but because I worried something had happened to her and I hadn't been there to help. 2 weeks after Miss Amina disappeared, I was elbow deep in the engine compartment of Bus 47, replacing a faulty alternator belt, when I noticed something unusual. Tucked into the corner of my rolling toolbox, hidden beneath my socket wrenches, was a cream-colored envelope. I wiped my hands on my work pants, leaving greasy streaks, and picked it up carefully. The paper was expensive, heavy stock with a texture I'd never felt before. There was no name on it, just a crimson wax seal pressed with an intricate design I didn't recognize. Inside was a formal invitation printed in elegant script. You are cordially invited to a family heritage luncheon. Below that, an address I didn't recognize and a date 3 days away. No explanation, no sender's name, just the invitation and an address that meant nothing to me. My supervisor, Dimitri, leaned over my shoulder. Secret admirer? I shook my head, staring at the paper. I don't know what this is, but something in my chest tightened with curiosity. Someone had gone to considerable effort to find me, to place this invitation where only I would discover it. The question was, why? The address led me to a part of the city I rarely visited, an old district where narrow cobblestone streets wound between buildings that predated the modern skyline. I followed the numbers until I reached what appeared to be an abandoned bookstore, its windows dusty and dark. The address was supposed to be here, but there was nothing. No restaurant, no venue, nothing but empty storefronts and a small alley between buildings. I almost turned back, almost dismissed the entire thing as an elaborate prank, probably orchestrated by Verena as another way to humiliate me. But something made me walk into that alley, following it deeper between the buildings. At the end, hidden from the street, was a wooden gate I'd never noticed before. Beyond it, a private garden cafe that seemed to exist in a different world. Ivy climbed the brick walls. String lights hung between trees. Small tables dotted the space, each one perfectly set with white linens and fresh flowers. A hostess in an elegant black dress greeted me at the entrance. "Mr. Castellan, we've been expecting you. Please, follow me." She led me to the last table, tucked beneath a flowering tree in the corner, where someone was already seated with their back to me. When the figure turned around, I stopped walking so abruptly that I nearly stumbled. Miss Amina sat at the table, but not the Miss Amina I knew. This woman was upright, her posture perfect. Her eyes were clear and sharp, no cloudiness obscuring their intelligent gaze. She wore a tailored silk suit in deep burgundy, her gray hair styled elegantly instead of hidden beneath that threadbare scarf. "Hello, Nico," she said, her voice clear and strong, nothing like the weak, wavering tone I'd grown accustomed to. "We need to talk." I stood frozen, trying to reconcile this woman with the frail figure I'd helped cross the street every Thursday for months. "Miss Amina? I don't understand." She gestured to the chair across from her. "Please, sit." I sat mechanically, my mind racing through possibilities, none of them making sense. She poured tea from an ornate pot, her movements precise and confident. "I owe you an explanation," she began, meeting my eyes directly. "And more importantly, I owe you the truth about why I've been watching you these past 6 months." My throat felt dry. "Watching me, testing humanity," she corrected gently. "And you, Nico, you passed every test." Miss Amina's real name was Amina Rexford, and she owned half the city. The company where Verena worked so proudly? Amina founded it 30 years ago. The properties scattered throughout the district, including the Grandview estate where we'd celebrated Verena's birthday, all hers. Even this hidden garden cafe belonged to her private collection of properties. I built an empire, she explained, stirring her tea slowly. But empires make you cynical. Everyone wants something. Everyone performs. I couldn't remember the last time I met someone genuine, someone whose kindness wasn't calculated. So she'd created a test. She'd disguised herself as a helpless elderly woman and wandered the streets, waiting to see if anyone would help without knowing who she was or what she could offer in return. Most people walked past me, she said, her voice tinged with sadness. The ones who did help always asked questions. Where do you live? Do you have family? They were looking for something to gain, even if they didn't realize it. She looked at me intently. But you never asked anything. You just helped. Week after week. You carried my bags, repaired my shopping cart, made sure I got home safely. And you never wanted anything except to see me again the following Thursday. I didn't know what to say. I'd just been helping someone who needed help. Amina reached into her briefcase and pulled out a leather folder containing several documents. She slid them across the table toward me. Property deeds, business transfer papers, account information. I want to give you one of my properties, she said simply. Consider it a thank you. I stared at the papers without touching them, my stomach twisting uncomfortably. Miss Amina, I can't accept this. I didn't help you for a reward. I did it because it was the right thing to do. I know, she said, her smile widening with something that looked like pride. That's exactly why you deserve it. I pushed the papers back across the table. I don't want anything. Knowing you're okay is enough for me. For a long moment, she studied my face as if reading something written there in invisible ink. Then she nodded slowly and pulled the papers back. You're remarkable, Nico, she said quietly, which is why I'm going to give you something whether you want it or not. Not because you helped me, but because the world needs more people like you in positions where they can make a difference. I had no idea what she meant, but I would find out soon enough. While I sat in that hidden garden with Amina, Verena was across the city in a glass-walled conference room at Rexford Industries, the company Amina had founded. Verena had worked there for 5 years, clawing her way from junior associate to senior manager through a combination of ruthless ambition and calculated networking. She'd just received word that she was being considered for a promotion to executive director, a position that came with a corner office, a substantial raise, and the kind of prestige that would cement her status as the family's success story. During her lunch break, she gathered with colleagues in the executive lounge, where she held court as usual, regaling them with stories designed to make herself look impressive. My brother actually showed up to my birthday party in a suit that looked like he bought it at a charity shop, she told the group, laughing. He works as a bus mechanic. Can you imagine? We should be grateful we let him sit at the table with us. Her colleagues laughed obligingly. None of them knew that the company's founder had been listening from the doorway. Amina made phone calls from the garden cafe while I sat across from her, still trying to process everything she told me. She spoke in low, authoritative tones to people I couldn't see, giving instructions I didn't fully understand. Process the transfer immediately, she said into her phone. Silent transaction. No press, no announcement. Just change the ownership records. She hung up and looked at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. Your family is planning a luncheon next Sunday. Cousin Darius's birthday at the Castellan Cafe. Correct. I nodded, surprised she knew our family's schedule. How did you? I know many things, Nico. She folded her hands on the table. And I know your sister chose that particular venue specifically because it's been in your family for 3 generations. It represents everything she thinks you'll never have. Status, history, legacy. My chest tightened. She was right. Verena always made sure to remind me that while our great-grandfather had built the cafe with his own hands, I would never be worthy of inheriting it. What if you did have it? Amina asked quietly. Not the cafe specifically, but something even better? Before I could answer, her phone buzzed. She glanced at it and smiled. It's done. What's done? I asked, confused. She just smiled mysteriously. You'll see soon enough. Sunday arrived with perfect weather. Blue skies, gentle breeze, the kind of day that seemed designed for celebration. I showed up to the Castellan Cafe in my work clothes because I'd come directly from a morning shift at the depot. I hadn't planned to attend at all, but my mother had called, insisting I at least make an appearance. The cafe's private dining room was already packed with extended family. Uncle Christoph had brought his wife and 3 children. Aunt Delora held court at one end of the table. Cousin Darius sat at the head, basking in attention. And Verena, dressed in a designer outfit that probably cost more than my monthly rent, presided over everything like royalty. When I walked in wearing my grease-stained jacket, conversations paused. Verena looked me up and down with barely concealed disgust. "At least try to look presentable for once, Nico," she said loud enough for everyone to hear. "You're embarrassing the family." I said nothing, just took my seat at the far end of the table, the same spot I always occupied at family gatherings. The spot reserved for the disappointment. The server, that kind young woman, approached to take drink orders. And that's when everything changed. The meal was extravagant as always. Verena had ordered without consulting anyone, choosing expensive dishes that would inflate the bill to an impressive number she could later brag about paying. The family ate and drank and laughed, celebrating Darius while largely ignoring my presence. Then came Verena's toast, that cruel, calculated moment when she raised her wine glass and announced, "To those who try, even if they're broke." The laughter that followed still echoed in my ears when the server approached with the bill. I watched, detached and calm, as she walked past Verena's expectant hand, past Uncle Christoph, past Aunt Delora, directly to me. The leather folder landed in front of me with my name printed clearly at the top. Owner account, Nico Castellan. Verena's laughter died in her throat. Her wine glass froze halfway to her lips. Color drained from her face, transforming her expression from smug triumph to utter confusion. "There must be a mistake," she said, her voice suddenly uncertain. "I made the reservation. The bill should be." "The bill is correct." A new voice interrupted from the doorway. Everyone turned. Amina stood at the entrance to the private dining room, no longer disguised, no longer pretending. She wore a formal business suit, her posture commanding, her presence filling the entire space. "Good afternoon," she said pleasantly. "Allow me to introduce myself properly. I'm Amina Rexford, founder and primary shareholder of Rexford Industries." Verena's face went from pale to ashen. She worked at Rexford Industries. She knew exactly who Amina was. The room descended into chaos. Verena stood abruptly, nearly knocking over her wine glass. Uncle Christoph's mouth hung open. Aunt Delora looked between Amina and me, trying to understand what was happening. "Ms. Rexford," Verena stammered, suddenly obsequious. "I had no idea you would be joining us. If I'd known, you would have behaved differently?" Amina interrupted, her tone pleasant but sharp. "That's precisely the problem, isn't it? People treat others based on what they can gain rather than simple human decency." She walked further into the room, her heels clicking on the hardwood floor. "I've spent 6 months observing humanity in disguise, testing whether kindness still exists without the promise of reward. Your brother passed every test. You, however..." Verena tried to speak, but no words came out. I watched her crumble, all her confidence evaporating like morning dew under harsh sunlight. "I'm afraid your promotion to executive director has been rescinded," Amina continued calmly. "We've been reviewing your expense reports and found significant irregularities. There's also the matter of documented workplace harassment against junior employees." The color that had drained from Verena's face rushed back in a hot wave of red. "That's not..." "I can explain." "No explanation necessary. Your employment is terminated effective immediately." The next morning, Verena drove to Rexford Industries despite everything that had happened, perhaps believing she could fix it somehow. She pulled into the underground parking garage where she'd parked every workday for 5 years. Her reserved spot, the one with her name painted in bold letters on the wall, was empty. Not just empty, painted over, where V. Castellan senior manager had been. There was now just blank concrete. She took the elevator up to her floor, her hands shaking as she pressed the button. The doors opened to the executive level, but her security badge no longer granted her access. The electronic lock beeped angrily, denying her entry. A security guard approached, polite but firm. "I'm sorry, ma'am. Your access has been revoked." "But my things," she protested weakly. "My office. Your personal belongings have been boxed and sent to your home address. There's also a letter waiting for you in your mailbox. From Ms. Rexford herself." Later, when Verena opened that letter, she found only one sentence. "Your brother always paid in full. You just never noticed." She didn't sleep that night, or the night after. The realization of what she'd lost, and why, consumed her completely. I visited the cafe on Tuesday morning before my shift at the depot. The staff was already there, preparing for the day's service. When I walked in, conversations stopped. People turned to look at me, and for the first time in my life, I saw respect in their eyes instead of dismissal. The head chef, a woman named Isadora who'd worked at the cafe for 20 years, approached me with a warm smile. "Mr. Castellan," she said, and the title sounded strange coming from her. "We've all heard what happened, what you did for that elderly woman. We've been waiting for someone like you." I shook my head, uncomfortable with the praise. "I just helped someone who needed help. That's what makes you different," Isadora replied. "You saw need instead of opportunity. That's rare." The staff gathered around, introducing themselves properly for the first time. I'd eaten at this cafe countless times over the years, but I'd never really seen these people, just like they'd never really seen me. Now we saw each other clearly. 3 days later, I met Verena at a small coffee shop far from the cafe, far from anywhere our family might see us. She looked different, smaller somehow. Her designer clothes seemed wrong on her now, like a costume that no longer fit. "Why did you agree to meet me?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. I studied her across the small table, saw the dark circles under her eyes, the tremor in her hands. Saw my sister. Not the cruel, ambitious woman who'd tormented me for years, but the girl who'd once shared a room with me when we were children, before success and failure had divided us. "I'm not offering you a job," I said carefully. "Not a management position or anything like that. But I'm offering you a second chance if you want it." She looked up, confusion and hope warring on her face. "The cafe needs good people," I continued. "People willing to work hard, to treat others with respect. If you're willing to start at the bottom and learn what real work means, there's a place for you." "Why?" she asked, tears forming in her eyes. "After everything I did to you, why would you help me?" I thought about Miss Amina, about the test she'd given me, about kindness that expects nothing in return. Because someone once showed me that kindness doesn't keep score. Verena broke down completely then. Years of carefully constructed pride shattered in an instant, leaving only raw truth. Tears streamed down her face as she covered it with shaking hands. "I'm so sorry," she sobbed. "I'm so sorry, Nico. I spent years making you feel worthless because it made me feel better about myself. I mocked everything good about you because I was terrified of being like you. I listened, saying nothing. You were always happy," she continued, her voice breaking. "Even with nothing, even when everyone dismissed you. You helped people, you cared about things that mattered. And I resented you for it because I realized I'd built my entire life around things that didn't matter at all." She looked up at me with red, swollen eyes. "I can't believe you're still willing to help me. I don't deserve it." "Maybe not," I agreed quietly. "But kindness isn't about deserving. It's about choosing to be better than the hurt you've received." For the first time in our adult lives, Verena reached across the table and took my hand. Not the performative gesture she'd used at family gatherings, but a real connection. Desperate and grateful and ashamed all at once. "Thank you," she whispered. "I'll prove I can change. I promise." 2 months later, I returned to the garden cafe where this had all begun. Amina had invited me for afternoon tea, a ritual she insisted on maintaining now that we'd become unlikely friends. I brought something with me, a carefully crafted wooden bench I'd built in the evenings after my shifts. I'd carved names into the surface. Miss Yara from the laundromat, the flower vendor, the bookstore owner, the mail carrier. Every person I'd helped over the years, every small kindness I'd offered without expecting recognition. I set it in the garden beneath the flowering tree where we'd first talked. I didn't want money or property, I explained to Amina. I wanted people to sit, to stay, to see each other. She studied the bench, running her fingers over the carved names. When she looked up, her eyes were bright with unshed tears. You understand what I've been searching for, she said softly. Not someone to inherit my empire, someone to remember why it mattered in the first place. We sat on the bench together, two people who'd found each other through disguise and truth, and watched the afternoon light filter through the leaves above. 6 months after everything changed, I walked through the old quarter on my way home from the depot, the same route I'd always taken, past the bakery, past the bookstore, past the flower vendor. But things were different now. The alley where I'd fed stray cats was cleaner, better lit. A group of teenagers had set up a proper feeding station, mimicking what I'd once done quietly and alone. They called out greetings as I passed. At the cafe, Verena was teaching a cooking class for underprivileged teens, sharing skills she'd learned from Isadora. She'd cut her hair shorter, wore simpler clothes, smiled more genuinely. She was learning what I'd always known, that worth wasn't measured in status or wealth, but in the small, everyday acts of seeing and helping others. As I walked home, I thought about the journey that had brought me here, how humiliation at a family lunch had revealed a truth I'd been living all along. Kindness never asks for recognition. It doesn't demand reward or expect gratitude, but life always finds a way to remember it. I paused at the intersection where I'd first helped Miss Amina, watching people cross in the fading light. An elderly man struggled with heavy bags. Without thinking, I stepped forward. Need some help? I asked. He looked surprised, then grateful. That would be wonderful, young man. As I carried his bags, I smiled, because this was who I was. Not because someone had rewarded me, not because I'd inherited a cafe or earned respect. Simply because someone needed help, and that would always be enough.